We are delighted that the Honourable Michael Kirby has agreed to speak on the topic, Are we really a socially inclusive nation? It's a fantastic question, a litmus test, if you like, for all of you dedicated to the work that you do. It's also a question about personal integrity, I think, in the everyday.
Is Australia an inclusive society? Well, now that is the question. When I was a young boy, I had a rude awakening to our tendency as a country to become rather harsh on minorities. My grandmother remarried, and her new husband happened to be the National Treasurer of the Australian Communist Party. This was back in the 1940s, and to be the National Treasurer of the Australian Communist Party was not a good career move, because at that time Australians were very afraid of communists, and the Menzies government, newly elected to power in 1949, had a mandate from the people to ban the Communist Party and impose on communists a whole range of civil disadvantages. But the Act, because it went through the federal parliament, was challenged in the court that I was later to join, and the High Court of Australia said you can impose obligations and penalties on communists for what they do, but you can't impose it for what they think. And it was the High Court of Australia in Mabo, unelected judges, who decided that in the light of the factual error and in the light of the principles of universal human rights and non-discrimination on the grounds of race, that the court should re-express the common law. What judges had done, judges could do again and differently. And so the Mabo decision was made, and that began the journey of the Aboriginal people to greater economic well-being. That journey is not over. Some would say it's not even really started. Education, health, housing remain very great problems for the Aboriginal people. 20 years ago, the rate of imprisonment in Australia was 120 citizens per 100,000. Now it's 150 per 100,000. In the United Kingdom, it's less than that. In the United States, it's 600 per 100,000. But in the case of the Aboriginal people of Australia, it's 2,000 per 100,000. So it's a huge number of the Indigenous people who are in prison. Lingering down there in our psyche is still a great fear of the stranger, and racism is not easily eradicated in any country, but on that matter Australia has form. The way we sign up to the Refugees Convention, and then when people come towards us to seek our sanctuary and asylum, we divert them to another country and we impose on them the obligation not of being processed by us, who have promised we will process them, but processed by Nauru or by Manus Island in Papua New Guinea or by Cambodia or other countries. That cannot be consistent with what we've signed up for in the Refugees Convention. There's still an awful lot of progress to be made in the front of equal opportunity for women. And that includes in the employment sector generally, and in the advance of women's opportunities, in the appointment and election of women to high positions in corporations. The number of women directors of corporations in Australia, as you know, is much lower than is the situation in Germany or in the United States or the United Kingdom. I saw a statement attributed to a very senior federal minister in the last week concerning an open letter that had been written by business leaders in this country to the Prime Minister, urging that the Prime Minister and the government parties should get on with the job and introduce legislation for marriage equality in this country. The business leaders included many captains of industry whose names I knew. Overwhelmingly male was the letter writers, but the message was strong and it was justified because the experience of industry, the experience of employment, is that it's in the interests of corporations and in the interests of employers generally to have people bring their whole self to work and not to leave their pronouns at home, and to get over the prejudices and attitudes of the past. It's so irrational. It's hobgoblin territory. But this minister, and you would have seen this in the newspapers, told these captains of our industry in Australia to get back to their knitting. So there's still work to be done in the Australia project. And it's work in which everybody, every citizen has an obligation on Aboriginality, on race in respect of refugee applicants, on gender, on disability, on aged status, and on sexuality, sexual orientation and gender identity. It still leaves space